in a strip along the coastline some 120 kilometers 75 mi long and up to 50 kilometers 30 mi wide. It was bounded by the province of Lycia on the W, the Roman province of Galatia on the N, and the kingdom of Antiochus on the E. On the coast the climate of Pamphylia was hot and tropical, while it moderated as one moved to the higher elevation of the Taurus Mountains. The inhabitants are thought to have been a mixture of a native tribe with Greeks, some even suggesting Pamphylia to mean of mingled tribes or races. Liddell and Scott's Greek English Lexicon, revised by H. Jones, Oxford, 1968, p. 1295. Evidently Jews or proselytes were in the area, for on Pentecost 33 CE persons from Pamphylia were in Jerusalem and were amazed to hear the disciples speaking in their own language. Act 2. 6, 10. A number of principal cities were on or near the coast, such as the seaport town of Italia, Pergia on the Sestrus River, and Side, where coastal pirates sold their booty and a slave market existed. From Paphos on Cyprus, Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark sailed NW across the sea and arrived at Perga in Pamphylia. It is not definitely known whether they landed at Italia and travelled on land the few miles to Perga or whether they sailed right to Perga. It is reported that in ancient times the Sestrus was navigable at least as far as Perga. At this point John Mark separated from the others and returned to Jerusalem, but Paul and Barnabas went in through the mountains to Antioch in Pisidia in the province of Galatia. Act 13. 13, 14, 15, 38, 27. 5. That route was notorious for bandits. Compare to Co 11. 26. On the return trip the two Christians travelled through Pamphylia to Perga and preached there. Next they went to the port of Italia and sailed from there to Antioch in Syria. Act 14. 24-26. Pamphylia over the years was ruled by Lydia, Persia, Macedonia, and Rome. Under the Romans it was at various times united as a province with Cilicia to the E, then with Galatia, and finally with Lycia. Act 13. 13. 16. 6. 27. 5. Paper. In Bible times, a thin writing material made into sheets from strips obtained from the papyrus plant. See papyrus. The Egyptians are credited with being the first manufacturers of papyrus paper for writing purposes, using papyrus plants that then grew along the banks of the Nile River. Some archaeologists would place such paper production as far back as Abraham's time. Early Christians used papyrus paper for their letters, scrolls, and codices. It also played an important part in the production of Bible manuscripts, until it was replaced by vellum finer-grained animal skin in the 4th century CE. At 2 John 12, the apostle wrote that he would rather convey his message face-to-face than with paper and ink. Here the word paper translates the Greek word karties, which is said to mean a sheet of paper made of papyrus. Paphos. A city on the W coast of the island of Cyprus. Here Paul, after working his way across the island with Barnabas and John Mark, encountered the sorcerer Bar Jesus Elymas, who opposed their preaching o textoi acute miritra longo. Papyrus 574. Papyrus palmital. Pyros heb. Gomi. A large aquatic plant belonging to the sedge family. It is a tapering three-sided stem, or stalk, that grows in shallow water to a height of 2 to 6 meters, 6.5 to 20 feet and terminates in a bush, or plume, of fine grass-like panicles. Picture, Volume 1, p. 544. The papyrus plant was used in the manufacture of various items, including a writing material. Papyrus cypress. Papyrus thrives in shallow, stagnant waters or marshes, and along the banks of slow-moving rivers, such as the Lower Nile, where it once flourished but is now nearly extinct. Bill had asked Job, will a papyrus plant grow tall without a swampy place? Job 8. 11. Issa 35. 7. The plant's stems are buoyant, and to prevent the death of the infant Moses, his mother placed him in an ark of papyrus coated with bitumen and pitch and set him adrift on the Nile River. X2. 3 large vessels for traveling long distances were also made from papyrus. Issa 18. 2. These may have been made of bundles of papyrus stems lashed together. They had narrow ends, but the beams were broad enough to support standing passengers, In 1970, Thor Heyerdahl and a group of associates traveled across thousands of miles of the Atlantic in such a craft. Use as writing material. When the Egyptians prepared papyrus for writing material, they followed a rather simple process. In gathering the stems, they prized the thick pithy part that grew under the surface of the water because it yielded the broadest and whitest raw material. The outer rinds were peeled off, and the remaining pithy cores were cut into convenient lengths of 40 to 45 centimeters 16 to 18 inches. Next, the cellular pith was sliced into broad, but very thin, strips. The strips were then laid out vertically on a smooth surface and allowed to overlap slightly. Another layer of papyrus strips was placed horizontally over the vertical ones. Mallets were used to beat the layers until they were bonded into a unified sheet. Then after being dried in the sun, the sheets were trimmed to their desired size. Finally, they were smoothed and polished with pumice, shells, or ivory. This process produced a fairly durable, supple, near-white writing material that was available in many sizes and degrees of quality. The side having the horizontal strips was usually chosen for writing, although at times the reverse side was used to finish a writing. The joints of the strips served to guide the writer's hand as he wrote with a reed pen and the writing fluid made from gum, soot, and water. These papyrus sheets could be pasted along the edges and joined to make a scroll, normally consisting of about 20 sheets. Or they might be folded into leaves to form the book-like codex that became popular among the early Christians. The average scroll measured some 4 to 6 meters, 14 to 20 feet in length, though one has been preserved that is 40.5 meters, 133 feet long. The Greek word biblos originally applied to the soft pith of the papyrus plant, but was later used with reference to a book. Mount 1. Mr. 12. 26. The diminutive blion has the plural bliae, literally meaning little books, and from this the word Bible is derived. 2t4. 13. The Phoenician city was called Byblos after it became an important center for the papyrus industry. Papyrus rolls were used widely until the beginning of the 2nd century CE, when they began to be superseded by the papyrus codex. Later, in the 4th century, the popularity of papyrus waned, and it was replaced extensively by a more durable writing material called vellum. Papyrus had one major disadvantage as a writing material in that it was not very durable. It deteriorated in a damp environment and, when stored under arid conditions, became very brittle. Until the 18th century CE, the assumption was that all ancient papyrus manuscripts had perished. However, in the late 19th century, a number of valuable biblical papyri were brought to light. O textoi acute muritra longo, Paradise 575 writings, whereas existing Persian writings go back only to about the 6th century BCE. Such derivation of the Hebrew term is only conjectural. EC2. 5. K4. 13. The remaining use of as is at Nehemiah 2. 8, where reference is made to a royal wooded park of Persian king Artaxerxes Longimanus, in the 5th century BCE. See park. The three terms Hebrew des, Persian paradisa, and Greek sos, however, all convey the basic idea of a beautiful park or park-like garden. The first such park was that made by man's creator, Jehovah God, in Eden. Ge2. 8, 9, 15. It is called a gan, or garden, in Hebrew but was obviously park-like in size and nature. The Greek Septuagint appropriately uses the term paradise with reference to that garden. See Eden number 1. Garden of Eden. Because of sin, Adam lost his right to live in that paradise and his opportunity to gain the right to everlasting life, which right was represented in the fruit of a divinely designated tree in the center of the garden. The Garden of Eden may have been enclosed in some way, since it was necessary to place angelic guards only at the east side thereof to prevent human entrance. Ge3. 22-24. What is the paradise that Jesus promised to the evildoer who died alongside him? Luke's account shows that an evildoer, being executed alongside Jesus Christ, spoke words in Jesus' defense and requested that Jesus remember him when he got into his kingdom. Jesus' reply was, "Truly I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise." Luke 23. 39-43. The punctuation shown in the rendering of these words must, of course, depend on the translator's understanding of the sense of Jesus' words, since no systematic punctuation was used in the original Greek text. Punctuation in the modern style did not become common until about the 9th century CE, whereas many translations place a comma before the word today and thereby give the impression that the evildoer entered paradise that same day. There is nothing in the rest of the scriptures to support this. Jesus himself was dead and in the tomb until the third day, and was then resurrected as the first fruits of the resurrection. Act 10. 40. 1 Cor 15. 20. Col 1. 18. He ascended to heaven 40 days later. Joe 20. 17. Act 1. 1-3, 9. The evidence is, therefore, that Jesus' use of the word today was not to give the time of the evildoers being in paradise but, rather, to call attention to the time in which the promise was being made and during which the evildoer had shown a measure of faith in Jesus. It was a day when Jesus had been rejected and condemned by the highest-ranking religious leaders of his own people and was thereafter sentenced to die by Roman authority. He had become an object of scorn and ridicule. So the wrongdoer alongside him had shown a notable quality and commendable heart attitude in not going along with the crowd but, rather, speaking out in Jesus' behalf and expressing belief in his coming kingship. Recognizing that the emphasis is correctly placed on the time of the promises being made rather than on the time of its fulfillment, other translations, such as those in English by Rotherham and Lamsa, those in German by Reinhard and W. Michaelis, as well as the Teutonian Syriac of the 5th century CE rendered the text in a form similar to the reading of the New World Translation, quoted herein. As to the identification of the paradise of which Jesus spoke, it is clearly not synonymous with the heavenly kingdom of Christ. Earlier that day entry into that heavenly kingdom had been held out as a prospect for Jesus' faithful disciples, but on the basis of their having stuck with him in his trials, something o textoi acute miritra longo. Paradise 576 was regarded by some as on earth itself, by others as forming part of Sheol, by others still as neither on earth nor under earth, but in heaven. But there is some doubt as respects, at least, part of this. These various conceptions are found indeed in later Judaism. They appear most precisely and most in detail in the medieval Kabbalistic Judaism. But it is uncertain how far back these things can be carried. The older Jewish theology at least seems to give little or no place to the idea of an intermediate paradise. It speaks of a Gehinnom for the wicked, and a Gan Eden, or Garden of Eden, for the just. It is questionable whether it goes beyond these conceptions and affirms a paradise in Sheol. 1905, Volume 3, pages 669, 670. Even if they did teach such a thing, it would be most unreasonable to believe that Jesus would propagate such a concept, in view of his condemnation of the non-biblical religious traditions of the Jewish religious leaders. Mount 15. 3-9 Likely the paradise truly familiar to the Jewish malefactor to whom Jesus spoke was the earthly paradise described in the first book of the Hebrew Scriptures, the paradise of Eden. That being so, Jesus' promise would reasonably point to a restoration of such earthly paradisaic condition. His promise to the wrongdoer would therefore give assured hope of a resurrection of such an unrighteous one to an opportunity to life in that restored paradise. Compare Act 24. 15. Read 20. 12, 13. 21. 1-5. Mount 6. 10. A spiritual paradise. Throughout many of the prophetic books of the Bible, divine promises are found regarding the restoration of Israel from the lands of its exile to its desolated homeland. God would cause that abandoned land to be tilled and sown, to produce richly, and to abound with humankind and animalkind. The cities would be rebuilt and inhabited, and people would say, "That land yonder which was laid desolate has become like the Garden of Eden." S 36. 6-11, 29, 30, 33-35. Compare Isa 51. 3. J 31. 10-12. S 34. 25-27. However, these prophecies also show that paradise conditions related to the people themselves, who, by faithfulness to God, could now sprout and flourish as trees of righteousness, enjoying beautiful spiritual prosperity like a well-watered garden, showered by bounteous blessings from God because of having His favor. Isra 58. 11. 61. 3, 11. J 31. 12. 32. 41. Compare PS 1. 3. 72. 3, 6-8, 16. 85. 10-13. Isra 44. 3, 4. The people of Israel had been God's vineyard, His planting, but their badness and apostasy from true worship had caused a figurative withering away of their spiritual field, even before the literal desolation of their land took place. Compare X 15. 17. Isra 5. 1-8. J 2. 21. It is evident, however, that the restoration prophecies recorded by the Hebrew prophets include elements that will also find a physical fulfillment in the restored earthly paradise. There are features, for example, in Isaiah 35. 1-7, such as the healing of the blind and the lame, that did not have a literal fulfillment following the restoration from ancient Babylon, nor are they fulfilled in such a manner in the Christian spiritual paradise. It would be inconsistent for God to inspire such prophecies as those of Isaiah 11. 6-9, Ezekiel 34. 25, and Hosea 2. 18, with the intention that they have only a figurative or spiritual meaning, without having a literal fulfillment of these things in the physical experiences of God's servants. The paradise that Paul mentioned at 2 Corinthians 12. 4 could also refer to the future paradise, both physical and spiritual, of these Hebrew prophecies, as well as possibly being a vision of the paradise of God, the blessed condition in heaven. Re 2. 7. Eating in the paradise of God. Revelation 2. 7 mentions a tree of life in the paradise of God, and that eating from it would be the privilege of the one that conquers. Since other promises given o textoi acute miritra longo, parchment 577 damage or disorder of the nervous system, or from atrophy of muscles, thus either preventing the transmission of nerve impulses, or rendering the muscles unable to react to them. Paralysis has many names and forms, some of which types can be fatal. Among its causes are diseases in the case of diphtheritic paralyses, brain lesions, damage to the spinal cord, or pressure from a tumor. Paralyzed persons were among those miraculously cured by Jesus Christ. Mount 4. 24 A paralyzed man was brought to Jesus, who cured the sufferer after forgiving his sins. Then, at Christ's bidding, the former paralytic picked up his cot and went home. Mount 9. 2-8. Mr. 2. 3-12. U5. 18-26 On another occasion the manservant of an army officer was laid up with paralysis and was about to die, but Jesus healed him from a distance. Mount 8. 5-13. Lu 7. 1-10 This slave was terribly tormented, or terribly afflicted. Mount 8. 6 Which may, but does not necessarily, indicate that he was suffering intense pain. Though usually not painful, paralysis may be. Cramp-like pains occur in the spine and the extremities in cases of paralysis legitimens Parkinsonism, or shaking palsy, and there is agonizing pain in paraplegia dolorosa, a form of paralysis associated with some cases of spinal cord cancer. Paralytics are persons afflicted with paralysis. The evangelist Philip preached, and he performed signs in the city of Samaria, curing many paralyzed persons. Act 8. 5-8 In Lydda, paralyzed Aeneas, who has been lying flat on his cot for 8 years, was told by Peter, Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Rise and make up your bed. At that, he rose immediately. Act 9. 32-35. Paran. The greater part of that vast wilderness region in which the nation of Israel wandered about for some 38 years before entering the Promised Land. New 10. 11, 12. 2. 14 Having no fixed boundaries, Paran occupied the central and northeastern portion of the Sinai Peninsula. On the E was that part of the Rift Valley known as the Araba and also the Gulf of the Kaaba, on the S the wilderness of Sinai, on this the wilderness of Sin, and on the NW and NE wildernesses of Etham and Shur. Toward the Dead Sea to the NE, Paran blended with, and perhaps included, the wilderness of Zin and perhaps even reached up to Beersheba near the mountains of Judah. 1 Sir 25. 1, 2. For the most part Paran was a rough mountainous region of limestone, plateulic in places, the central section being between 600 and 750 meters, 2,000 to 2,500 feet high. 33. 2. Compare Hab 3. 3. It was also included as part of that great and fear-inspiring wilderness referred to in Deuteronomy 1. 1, 19. 8. 15. Except during the brief rainy seasons, the gravel face of this rude country is devoid of green vegetation. Springs are few and far between. These factors emphasize how completely the nation of Israel, numbering perhaps 3 million persons, was dependent upon Jehovah for his miraculous provision of food and water during the many years they wandered in the wilderness. Acts 16. 1, 4, 12-15, 35. 2. 7. 8. 15, 16. Apparently the first reference to this wilderness of Paran was in the days of Lot, when Chedorlaomer and his allies defeated a number of cities in the vicinities of the Dead Sea and Edom as far as El Paran. GE 14. 4-6 Later, after Ishmael was dismissed by his father Abraham, he settled down in the wilderness of Paran and occupied himself mainly with the hunt. GE 21. 20, 21. However, the principal references to Paran are in connection with the wanderings of the Israelites. After leaving Mount Sinai, Israel camped at Taberah and Kibroth Hattaavah, then at Hatzeroth on the southern edge of Paran, before moving in toward Kadesh Barnea. New 10. 12, 33. 11. 3, 34, 35. 12. 16 Not long after entering Paran, the 12 spies were sent out to investigate Canaan. New 13. 3, 26 The bad report given by the majority upon their return resulted in Jehovah's decree that the Otextoi acute Miritra Longo, pardon 578 when the ruler of Egypt prohibited the exporting of it about 190 BCE. The use of leather parchment was invented in Pergamum. The English word parchment comes from Lat. Pergamena. Perhaps this means simply the popularizing of an already existing method of treating the skin so that both sides could be written on. Scrolls of parchment were much more durable than the less expensive papyrus scrolls. At 2 Timothy 4. 13 the Apostle Paul asked Timothy to bring the scrolls, especially the parchments. In W. Row he does not indicate the contents of these requested items, but quite possibly he was asking for portions of the Hebrew scriptures so that he could study them while imprisoned in Rome. The phrase especially the parchments may indicate that both scrolls of papyrus and scrolls of parchment were involved. Among the early Romans, wooden tablets covered with wax were often used for writing matters of a temporary nature. Eventually sheets of leather or parchment were used instead for this purpose. The Latin word membraniscens was applied to such notebooks of parchment. In the text quoted earlier, Paul employed the Greek equivalent of the word in asking for the scrolls, especially the parchments branas. Thus some commentators have suggested that he was requesting scrolls of the Hebrew scriptures plus notes or letters of some type. So Moffat translates it, my books, and particularly my papers, and the New English Bible reads, the books, above all my notebooks. However, whether the parchments were in the form of notebooks or papers, or were parchment scrolls KX cannot be ascertained. Vellum. Parchments were normally made from sheep, goat, or calf skin. In the 3rd and 4th centuries CE there arose a distinction between the coarser and the finer grades of the material, the coarser continuing to be called parchment, but the finer, vellum. The vellum was made from delicate skins of calf veal or kid, or of stillborn calves or lambs. It was prepared by scraping the hair from the washed skins, stretching them on a frame, washing and scraping again to remove inequalities, dusting with chalk, and rubbing with pumice. This produced a thin, smooth, almost white writing material that came to be widely used for important books until the invention of printing, for which paper was better and cheaper. Important Bible manuscripts such as the 4th century Sinaitic and Vatican No. 1209 as well as the 5th century Alexandrine manuscripts are of vellum. Pardon. The Hebrew word na-middle-sa, sometimes translated pardon, is also used in the scriptures in the sense of raise, lift up GE 45. 19. X6. 8. 2 Chi 2. 16. Take GE 27. 3. Take away new 16. 15. A basic meaning of the word, however, is bear, carry. GE 47. 30. 1 Chi 2. 26. S 44. 12. 13 There is still an allusion to this in instances where na-middle-sa is appropriately translated pardon. The scriptures speak of the goat for Azazel as carrying away sin, and it was foretold that the Messiah would bear the error of the people. The 16. 8, 10, 22. Isra 53. 12 By reason of his carrying, or bearing, the error of others, pardon is made possible for them. See Azazel. Whereas the word na-middle-sa may denote the pardon, or forgiveness, extended by God or by humans GE 18. 24, 26. 50. 17. Sa-middle-lack is used exclusively of God's forgiveness, the act by which the sinner is restored to divine favor in answer to his sincere prayer for forgiveness or to another's intercessory prayer. New 14. 19, 20. 1 Chi 8. 30. When the Hebrew na-middle-sa has the sense of pardon, or forgiveness, the Greek Septuagint at times uses the word a-middle-miles in its basic sense. A-middle-me denotes let go of. This term can signify forgive, pardon. At Romans 4. 7, the Apostle Paul quoted from Psalm 32. 1:31. 1, LXX, where the reference is to Jehovah's pardoning revolt, and he used a form of the word a-middle-me, as does the Greek Septuagint o textoi acute miritra longo, Partridge 579. Among his great works, Solomon made both gardens and parks orchards, KJ. Heb. Far-middle-SM in which he planted fruit trees of all sorts. EC2. 5 He uses the same term in his superlative song when he as the shepherd lover described the Shulamite maiden's skin as a paradise of pomegranates, with the choicest fruits. Ka 1. 1. 4. 12, 13 In post-exilic times, Nehemiah 2. 7, 8 shows that the Persian king had placed Asaph as the keeper of the park that belongs to the king, and that application had to be made for permission to fell trees from this park for the reconstruction work in Jerusalem. See forest. Garden. Parmash to par-middle-mashtar from Persian, possibly meaning the very first. One of Haman's 10 sons. As 9. 9. Parmenas parmi-middle-nas. One of the 7 recommended to the apostles and appointed by them to ensure a just daily distribution of food supplies in the Jerusalem congregation after Pentecost of 33 CE Acts 6. 1-6. Parnak. A Zebulonite whose son Elizaphan was the tribal representative in dividing the promised land. New 34. 17, 18, 25. Parosh flee. Founder of a family in Israel. There were 2,172 of his descendants who returned to Jerusalem with Zerubbabel in 537 BCE as 2. 1-3. Ne7. 8 By the time that Ezra arrived in 468 BCE with 150 sons of Parosh led by Zechariah, some of their family already in Jerusalem had taken foreign wives, whom they later sent away. Ezra 8. 1, 3. 10. 25, 44 Pedaiah, one of the family, repaired a section of Jerusalem's wall. Ne 3. 25 The head of the Parosh family attested to the later covenant agreeing to keep the law of Jehovah. Ne 9. 38. 10. 1, 14. Pashanthapar middle-shan-middle-dartha from Persian, possibly meaning the investigator. One of Haman's 10 sons. As 9. 7. Parsin. One of the words mysteriously written on the wall of Belshazzar's palace and read and interpreted by Daniel. Dar 5. 25. It is the plural number of Perez, which means a half shekel, a division of a shekel. In giving the interpretation, Daniel did not use the plural parsin, but used the singular form Perez. Dar 5. 28. Perhaps this was because only Belshazzar was present to hear the prophet explain the prophetic message, although it applied to both rulers of the Babylonian Empire, Belshazzar and Nabonidus. See Perez. Parthians. Parthia. Ends of belonging to Parthia. Jews and proselytes from Parthia are listed first among those visitors attending the festival of Pentecost, 33 CE in Jerusalem. God's Holy Spirit poured out on the group of about 120 Christian disciples, enabled them to proclaim the good news in the language or dialect of those Parthians, some of whom doubtless responded favorably, became Christians, and likely spread the message among their own people upon returning to Parthia. Act 1. 15. 2. 1, 4-12, 37-47. The natural Jews from Parthia were part of the dispersion. The proselytes. Act 2. 10 were non-Jews who had become converts to Judaism. The Parthian Empire originated of the Caspian Sea, but in time came to extend from the Euphrates as far as India. The Parthians were subject to the Persians from the time of King Cyrus. Later, coming under Greek domination, they rebelled against the successors of Alexander the Great and managed to maintain their independence for several centuries, even against Rome. They held Judea for several years before losing it to the Romans. The Parthians were still an independent nation in the 1st century, and though they practiced the predominant Persian religion, the religions of the Jews and others were tolerated. Partridge. Heb. Co-middle. A chicken-like gallinaceous bird, stout-bodied, smaller than the pheasant, able to run and dodge with great swiftness, seldom resorting to flight and tiring quickly when it does. Two kinds of partridges found in Palestine are the sand partridge Apocalyptic and the rock partridge Electris greco-textoi acute muritra longo, Peru. 580. A partridge upon the mountains. 1 Sir 26. 20. Compare 3. 52. The text at Jeremiah 17. 11, likening the man unjustly amassing wealth to the partridge that has gathered together or, possibly, hatched what it has not laid, has been the subject of much discussion. Whereas certain ancient writers described the partridge as taking eggs from other hens' nests and incubating them, present-day naturalists state that none of the birds classified as partridges have such a practice. However, Lexicon in Veteris Testamenti Libros refers to Jewish zoologist Israel Aharoni 1882-1946, a writer of works on Palestinian animal life, as having found 2 layings of 11 eggs each of 2 different females partridges in the same nest. By L. Cooler and W. Baumgartner, Leiden, 1958, p. 851. Thus, the Encyclopaedia Judaica 1973, Volume 13, Col. 156 states. Sometimes 2 females lay eggs in the same nest, in which case one gains the upper hand and drives the other away. However, her small body is unable to keep such a large number of eggs warm, so that eventually the embryos die. It was to this that the proverb in Jeremiah 17. 11 referred when speaking of one who robs another of his possessions without ultimately deriving any benefit. Jeremiah 17. 11 in the King James Version reads, As the partridge sitteth on eggs, and hatcheth them not, so he that getteth riches, and not by right, shall leave them in the midst of his days, and at his end shall be a fool. In support of this alternative interpretation, John Sawyer reasons that the point is the proverbial vulnerability of the partridge's nest, exposed as it is to marauding predators of many kinds, compared to the vulnerability of the fool who puts his trust in base gain. He goes on to say that the effectiveness of the proverb in Jeremiah 17. 11 does not depend on the treachery of the brooding partridge, but on its vulnerability, compared to the false sense of security of the fool who thinks he can get away with his criminal acquisitiveness. Unaware of the dangers hanging over him and defenseless when disaster strikes. Vetus Testamentum, Leiden, 1978, pages 324, 328, 329. Peru Parmiddle. Father of the Jehoshaphat who served as Solomon's food deputy in the territory of Issachar. 1 Kai 4. 7, 17. Parsach. Family head in the tribe of Asher. Son of Japhlet. 1ch7. 30, 33, 40. Pazdamim Pazdamim. Evidently another name for Ephisdamim, a place between Soko and Azekah. 1ch17. 1. 1ch11. 13. Parsiapar. Salam. 1. A descendant of Judah in the line of Chub the brother of Shua. 1ch4. 1, 11, 12. 2. Forefather of a family of Nethinim, some of whom returned from the Babylonian exile with Zerubbabel in 537 BCE as 2. 1, 2, 43, 49. Ne7. 51. 3. Father of the Joiada, who helped repair the gate of the old city in the wall of Jerusalem 455 BCE. Ne3. 6. Pasha. 1. Father of Gedaliah, who was one of the princes of Judah responsible for having Jeremiah thrown into a cistern. J38. 1, 4, 6. 2. A prince in the delegation King Zedekiah sent to inquire of Jeremiah concerning the future of Jerusalem. J21. 1, 2. Pasha also petitioned the king for Jeremiah to be put to death. J38. 1, 4, 6. Pasha is called in these two passages the son of Malchijah. The family of priests returning from Babylonian exile contains a similar link in their genealogy, Pasha the son of Malchijah. 1ch9. 12. Ne11. 12. If Prince Pasha was indeed a priest, he may be the one from whom the sons of Pasha know. 4. Draw their name. 3. A priest, the son or descendant of Immer. The leading commissioner in the house of Jehovah. Pasha, objecting to Jeremiah's prophecies, struck him on, put him into the stocks, and released him the following day. As a result, Jehovah, through Jeremiah, foretold exile and death in Babylon for Pasha and, accordingly, changed his name from Pasha Otex to Acute Miritra Longo. Passover 581 within the months March-April of the Gregorian calendar. Passover was followed by 7 days of the Festival of Unfermented Cakes, Nisan 15-21. Passover commemorates the deliverance of the Israelites from Egypt and the passing over of their firstborn, when Jehovah destroyed the firstborn of Egypt. Seasonally, it fell at the beginning of the barley harvest. X12. 14, 24-47. La23. 10. Passover was a memorial celebration. Therefore the scriptural command was, and it must occur that when your sons say to you, what does this service mean to you? Then you must say, it is the sacrifice of the Passover to Jehovah, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt, when he plagued the Egyptians, but he delivered our houses. X12. 26, 27. Since the Jews reckoned the day as starting after sundown and ending the next day at sundown, Nisan 14 would begin after sundown. It would be in the evening after Nisan 13 concluded that the Passover would be observed. Since the Bible definitely states that Christ is the Passover sacrifice 1 Co 5. 7 and that he observed the Passover meal the evening before he was put to death, the date of his death would be Nisan 14, not Nisan 15, in order to fulfill accurately the time feature of the type, or shadow, provided in the law. Heb 10. 1. Laws governing its observance. Each household was to choose a male sheep or goat that was sound and a year old. It was taken into the house on the 10th day of the month Abib and kept until the 14th, and then it was slaughtered and its blood was splashed with a bunch of hyssop on the doorposts and the upper part of the doorway of the dwelling in which they were to eat it, not on the threshold where the blood would be trampled on. The lamb or goat was slaughtered, skinned, its interior parts cleansed and replaced, and it was roasted whole, well done, with no bones broken. 2ch35. 11. New 9. 12. If the household was too small to consume the whole animal, then it was to be shared with a neighbor household and eaten that same night. Anything left over was to be burned before morning. X12. 10. 34. 25. It was eaten with unfermented cakes, the bread of affliction, and with bitter greens, for their life had been bitter under slavery. X1. 14. 12. 1-11, 29, 34. 16. 3. What is meant by the expression between the two evenings? The Israelites measured their day from sundown to sundown. So Passover day would begin at sundown at the end of the 13th day of Abib Nisan. The animal was to be slaughtered between the two evenings. X 12. 6. There are differences of opinion as to the exact time meant. According to some scholars, as well as the correct Jews and Samaritans, this is the time between sunset and deep twilight. On the other hand, the Pharisees and the Rabbinists considered the first evening to be when the sun began to descend and the second evening to be the real sunset. Due to this latter view, the rabbis hold that the lamb was slaughtered in the latter part of the 14th, not at its start, and therefore that the Passover meal was actually eaten on Nisan 15. On this point Professors Kiel and Delitzsch say, different opinions have prevailed among the Jews from a very early date as to the precise time intended. Ibn Ezra agrees with the Karaites and Samaritans in taking the first evening to be the time when the sun sinks below the horizon, and the second the time of total darkness. In which case, between the two evenings would be from 6 o'clock to 7:20. According to the rabbinical idea, the time when the sun began to descend, viz. from 3 to 5 o'clock, was the first evening, and sunset the second. So that between the two evenings was from 3 to 6. O text to acute miritra longo. Passover 582. At the Passover in Egypt, the head of the family was responsible for the slaying of the lamb or goat at each home, and all were to stay inside the house to avoid being slain by the angel. The partakers ate in a standing position, their hips girded, staff in hand, sandals on so as to be ready for a long journey over rough ground, whereas they often did their daily work barefoot. At midnight all the firstborn of the Egyptians were slain, but the angel passed over the houses on which the blood had been spattered. X 12. 11, 23. Every Egyptian household in which there was a firstborn male was affected, from the house of Pharaoh himself to the firstborn of the prisoner. It was not the head of the house, even though he may have been a firstborn, but was any male firstborn in the household under the head, as well as the male firstborn of animals, that was slain. X 12. 29, 30. See firstborn, Fisling. The 10 plagues upon Egypt all proved to be a judgment against the gods of Egypt, especially the 10th, the death of the firstborn. X 12. 12. For the ram male sheep was sacred to the god Amun-Ra, so that splashing the blood of the Passover lamb on the doorways would be blasphemy in the eyes of the Egyptians. Also, the bull was sacred, and the destruction of the firstborn of the bulls would be a blow to the god Osiris. Pharaoh himself was venerated as a son of Ra. The death of Pharaoh's own firstborn would thus show the impotence of both Ra and Pharaoh. In the wilderness in the Promised Land, only one Passover celebration in the wilderness is mentioned. New 9. 1-14. The keeping of the Passover during the wilderness journey likely was limited, for two reasons. 1. Jehovah's original instructions were that it must be kept when they reached the Promised Land. X 12. 25. 13. 5. 2. Those born in the wilderness had not been circumcised. Jos 5. 5. Whereas all male partakers of Passover had to be circumcised. X 12. 45-49. Record of Passovers observed. The Hebrew scriptures give direct accounts of the Passover 1 in Egypt. X 12. 2 in the wilderness at Sinai, Nisan 14, 1512 BCE. New 9. 3 when they reached the Promised Land, at Gilgal and after the circumcision of the males, 1473 BCE. Jos 5. 4 at the time that Hezekiah restored true worship. 2 ch 30. 5 the Passover of Josiah. 2 ch 35. And 6 the celebration by Israel after the return from Babylonian exile. As 6. Also, mention is made of Passovers held in Samuel's day and during the days of the kings, at 2 ch 35. 18. After the Israelites were settled in the land, the Passover festival was observed in the place that Jehovah will choose to have his name reside, instead of in each home or in the various cities. In time, the chosen place came to be Jerusalem. The 16. 1-8. Accretions. After Israel had settled in the Promised Land, certain changes were made and various accretions came about in observing the Passover. They no longer partook of the feast in a standing position, or equipped for a journey, for they were then in the land that God had given them. The first-century celebrants customarily ate it while lying on their left side, with the head resting on the left hand.